Art, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, good. We can hear you as well.
Ah, perfect.
Feel free to jump in if I'm not looking in your direction.
No problem.
If you want to jump in on. So I'll call the meeting to order of the Finance and Audit Committee of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. Can I get a motion to amend the agenda to move 5.1 to, I guess, the beginning of the reports? Okay. Questions? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing and hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes of our meeting of July 19th? Moved by Paul, seconded by Harj. Any corrections to the minutes? Not seeing or hearing any. All in favor of approval? Carried, thank you. Seeing no business arising from the minutes. I guess technically we don't. Okay. Then moving on, I need a motion to go in camera to, for financial information that belongs to the authority and has potential monetary value, the 2024 audit planning letter. Moved by Dean, seconded by Paul. Questions? Discussion? All in favor? Carried. So we're moving in camera.
Between now and whatever that would you think would affect the audit, just let me know.
We will.
We try to keep in touch, but
We do.
anyways, it's good to have no surprises. So
It's
always feel free to contact me.
Yeah, I try to give. a heads
Yeah,
up.
yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for doing this. It's a really good thing to do.
Okay.
Yep.
So maybe read the motion again, somebody to move it.
Yeah, but the Finance and Audit Committee receives the audit plan.
Moved by Harj, seconded by Dean. Further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll see you in a month or so.
Yeah. Yeah, come quick.
Item 4.1 is the budget and reserves policy. This is our second crack at it. Thank you, Christine, for the work you and your staff have put into this. I had already mentioned to Christine, I think this is a much clearer draft for us to wrestle with. I think there's a lot of good information in here. Some really tough decisions to make. Because I think just by prefacing this, I think Christine wants us to understand that the reserves that we have aren't really sufficient for an organization our size. And you can't see Christine nodding, she did. So, but still, Christine is looking for the committee's feedback, ideas, comments, frankly, on some of the percentages that she's presented to us. Are the numbers too high? Are the numbers too low in terms of, how much the reserve should be? And she'll take that information back and come back one more time with a policy. And you notice the connection between reserves and budget. So this is a comprehensive look at the financial piece of this organization. So given the complexity of, gonna have kind of free form discussion here. Harsh, Dean, Paul, who wants to start?
I just had a quick question of going from previous years. Was there a certain percentage that was in, kind of put aside for reserves? Or it was kind of every year was different?
It was leftover. And that's that's partly how we're in the position we are today, because I don't believe there ever has been set target for reserves. And so if you don't have a set target, you can't make a plan on how to get there. Which is the budgeting side of reserves. So the targets that are listed on page 5 are a range in many cases and come from consultation with the managers about the risks that they see to their groups of programs, or a flood control structure, for example, and a basic analysis of what potential costs might be incurred that were unexpected or unplanned. So our reserves are not entirely like a municipal reserve. They are really a pot of contingency, right? We may plan to have a deficit in a certain year, in which case we would identify what reserves would therefore have to be depleted. But certainly the flood control, the structured reserves, we sat down and we said, if you have one, not just one, but perhaps 2 significant, but not disastrous incidents at one structure that were unplanned, what could be the cost, or what could happen in a year, and what would be the cost? So we laid out 5 groupings of dams or channels, what the potential costs would be. And for instance, the category 3 operating reserve, based on what it is today, a negative number, and maybe up to $4 million, why perhaps would we need such a large category 3 reserve? Well, the basic fact is category 3 program funding is not stable. It's variable, highly variable. We don't know when we're going to have grants. And if we have to ramp down programs in category 3 in a fairly big hurry, you might have 20 staff that would be impacted. Well, that then is almost an HR reserve here. It's a elimination pool of reserve. So what could happen to category 3 programs? What could happen to category 2 contracts? What category 1, for example, probably doesn't need as large a reserve because it is mandatory, it's leviable. Why would we need such a great contingency in category 1? We probably wouldn't. So that's where the targets came from. And then we addressed, well, how much cash do we actually have to have associated with these reserve levels? That's where that came from. But there is no plan here on how to increase the reserves. This is preliminary. We've not had such a reserve policy. So I think there's got to be time for people to digest this here and among the board members. How to get there is another completely other question, because the budgetary part of this says, let's fully fund category 1 first. That's not adding to reserves. That's just making sure those programs are funded.
Harsh? No.
There's a lot to go here.
Anything else, Harsh?
No, I was just comparing it to a corporate role, like,
Yeah.
and in my corporate world, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? And we try to do your kind of best, when you're preparing for large projects, best. But if you have money left over at the end, sometimes it's not looked or is frowned upon, right? Because they could use it towards debt or, something else. So I was just wondering, however, how when we price projects or when we prepare budgets for projects, we have a certain percentage. So I wasn't sure, like, if we had some sort of a number that leaves something in reserves, just in case, for a case of an emergency, if something did happen. So, because I think we should have something in reserves because, the unexpected can happen. And if we don't have nothing there, then, that's a whole different struggle on its own.
And I think Christine's laid out for us some things we can talk about in terms of how much. And that would be page 7 of her report, where she's talking about the various operating reserves anyway. And I talked to Christine ahead of time. I said, where do these numbers come from? 2 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, et cetera, et cetera. So, we can change that. We can challenge her in, do we really need something that big, or do we need something smaller? And, I think she mentioned maybe the easy one to start with is the campground reserve, because it seems to be well funded already to the target that you've set out. And because the nature of the program, it can be self-funding of a reserve. So it won't come from levy anyway.
No, category 3.
Yeah. So, it almost makes sense to be at 100% of a target. Is the target right? And the suggestion is, 6 months. If we have to shut, it was 4 to 6 months?
4 to 6.
Yeah, 4 to 6. If we have to shut down, does that make sense?
Right, yeah.
So we're good with that one?
Mhm.
Okay. That's the easy part.
Shut
Yeah.
The campground does cover their capital spending through that reserve.
Yeah,
So as we might need to build a new washroom facility or something, then every year for 20 years, they're going to have additional depreciation costs. Well, they have to have enough funding each year, enough revenue to cover that additional cost each year, without perhaps dipping into that reserve, or maybe slightly dipping into that reserve. So,
and I guess sort of in the old days, campgrounds were subsidizing what's now category 1.
correct.
Yeah. And we can't do that anymore.
Well, we shouldn't be doing that.
Well, yeah. I guess technically we could, but why?
Technically, we could, but
Yeah. So we're good on the idea of the campground operating reserve. Category 3 operating reserve is a different challenge. And as we heard today, we're getting a lot of money from the federal government contract. So this is all category 3. We will be ramping up with staff, technically contract staff.
that's contract stuff.
But my understanding from the HR and the legal world is, even if you let contract staff go, there's severance costs involved, potentially. Yeah, depending on the time and
How many years?
duration and stuff. So, yeah, so that's what you had said about why you want to have a category 3 operating reserve distinct from the campground reserve. And right now, there's nothing.
The other distinction between the two is that category 3 programs have cost apportioning. They
Yeah,
have contributions from the municipalities, but the campgrounds do not.
yeah. Right.
So, and the campgrounds are an annual operating activity with certain, it's a profit business, really. And category 3 grant programs are certainly not. So there are actually vast differences between what happens in the campgrounds and other category 3 stuff.
Yeah, and the category 3 contracts or agreements that we have with municipalities could be canceled.
Yes, they could, or just could never appear.
Right. So there's a suggestion that we consider 4 to 6 months of annual operating costs. Now, that number just went much higher with the federal contract. So is 4 to 6 months a realistic number as a target, to come from those sources of revenue? Because it's not coming from any other categories, right?
That kind of reserve would take a long time to build,
Right.
a very long time.
And are we even able to use contract money to fill that reserve?
Without calling it contract money, yes, you could. Could, but as I say, it would take a long time to build.
Right.
Because most of the contracts come with deliverables that say, I'll grant you this money if you show me exactly how you're spending it. And if you're spending it tuck away for a rainy day, nobody's gonna fund that.
Right.
So these are very small balances that might come off at the end of a contract that a funder basically says, no, you can hang on to that $10,000. I don't want to deal with it coming back. Some funders behave that way, others don't. So
Kind of keep the tip time.
in a way that is, in a way that happens sometimes. Or it could be if there is a user fee associated with a contract, so it matches other funds that we're generating ourselves. So if there's a surplus left at the end of the program, it can be attributed to the user fees, not the funder money. Possible. But the revenue for category 3 programs is highly variable. And so a reserve for staffing purposes would be the biggest risk that we envision in category 3 programs.
So like what Brad announced today, the 17 million over 4 years. Well, if it's $4 million a year on average, how much, like you said, Christine, it'd take a long time to accumulate a reserve from that influx of money. Like what, can you give a sense of how much of the $4 million per year, how much could be allocated into reserve without having any?
Directly, none.
Directly.
The funder is not paying, is not funding us for a reserve.
I understand that.
But they've allowed us 13% for our overheads.
13, so, okay.
And that would turn into category 1 benefit.
You might be looking at 50,000 a year, and that'd probably be a lot, I expect. So like, probably realistically, 10, 15, 20,000. I'm just trying to get an order of magnitude.
Yes.
And
Not large.
the need is 1.3 to 2 million.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all right, so.
Yeah. And in the old days, because we didn't have the categorization of programs, the movement of funds between programs gave us a lot of flexibility and allows us to have matching funding to get grants. That's going to be the biggest challenge we have, from 2024 on, is with category 3 having matching funding for grants.
And where do we get them?
Cost apportioning.
Okay, so so the category 3 agreements for our leverage to match. Okay, so
And they'll continue to be.
okay, so that's our sole source of matching funds then.
Pretty much.
All right, so then.
Few user fees.
So then just thinking West Perth, ours was like 15,000 or something like that. So the next year's request could come back at double, or it could come back for more if the need was for more to match the federal program.
But it's by agreement.
Yes, I
So
understand.
it's not a guaranteed revenue source for us, which is why we should be thinking about building a category 3 operating reserve.
I'm just trying to understand how all the other parts work and then I can see where the reserve portion fits in. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm wondering, based on the discussion, are we comfortable in Christine's recommendation essentially that operating reserve shall be 4 to 6 months of annual operating costs, noting that it's going to take a while to get there? You know, it's a target, it's something to, you know, we're beginning a policy. It sounds like a reasonable number to start with. If it's not a reasonable number in a year or two, because your recommendation is to come back every year with it, we'll look at it again. But personally, I think I'm okay with it. You know, and to fund it, I mean, it's only to 50% of that target. So it's a starting point, and I'm okay with it. Others on the committee?
Yeah, I'm good with it too. It's a good benchmark, you know, and then we can kind of, you know, gauge it as we're kind of moving forward.
Dean, Paul?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. Come back in a year and see how much we have been able to contribute to it. It's totally unrealistic and
No.
gonna take 40 years to get there. None of us have to worry about it.
It will be addressed if we have a reserve document. Might not have to call it a policy, but if we have an idea, perhaps what our reserve should be, then the next step would be create a plan to help get there. And that would involve a whole other set of discussions that falls out from a basic set of budgetary guidelines here.
And what I'm hearing, go back to your comments earlier about we never had a plan for reserves. We just did budgets, and then if we had money left over, it went into reserves. What I'm hearing is not only we're changing into these categories, but we're changing the philosophy of financial planning.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
Because up till now, our financial planning has been year to year budget based.
Budget based.
And if we thought we could get enough money through levy and other sources that we could put some money into reserves, but then other years we think, well, we can't raise the levy that much and we're not going to get grants. So we got to pull out of reserves. So the core has been the budget. Now we have to look at it. The core is the reserves. And we use the budget
To get there.
And that's what we're doing at the township level too, a lot more is through our asset management planning is how do we put money away so that in 20 years we can replace that building or that bridge or whatever.
That's it exactly. And knowing that asset management planning is on the horizon.
Yeah.
We need to know what reserves we're gonna track things in. We should be thinking about what the right target is, because the asset management plan is when it's fully developed, and that could take 5 years.
Mhm.
But when that's fully developed, it's going to say you need $40 million in reserves in 20 years.
Yeah.
And then that is going to impact the plan that comes out of this. And then you're really starting to do some long-term financial planning, which we haven't been doing.
We're just sort of like the person that lives paycheck to paycheck and decides what we're going to do. Whether they're going to take a vacation based on their paycheck, that's still the person that has money in the bank and decides, do I take a vacation because I've got money in the bank? And it's a totally 180 change of.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the real challenge.
Yeah.
And then you add in the restrictions that we can't take money from that bank. account, put it in-
Exactly. Yeah, it becomes absolutely more necessary now than ever.
Yeah.
We can start at 4 to 6 months. Thinking the four is more achievable than 6. 4 will be a tough based on Christine's comments or response to my question, but we'll start there and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on to category 2 operating reserve. recommendation being 0 because they're contracts. So no contract, no reserve,
Money in, money out, right?
yeah, so it's,
It should be 0.
right, yeah,
There may be $1,000 in there one year,
yeah,
but then we'll spend it the next year.
yeah. So that,
Yeah.
that's another easy one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we get to the hard one. The category 1 operating reserve. And recommending between 2 and 3 months of annual operating costs, which comes out to, a lot of money. And as you notice from the appendix or the schedule that was with, well, we have nowhere near that. And that's another reason why there's challenges in the budget this year too, because that reserve was used last year, along with the deficit. So why, Christine, you had mentioned why 2 or 3 months in annual operating costs?
Well, the key thing about category 1 is that the programs are leviable. And the other funding sources, although small, the $181,213 we get from MRF every year, it's been the same now for 6 years. And prior to that, it was the same for 20 years.
Except twice as much.
It was twice as much then, but anyway, it was the same every year. So we know what that is. We can predict it. The mandatory programs have less
Certainty?
less variability in size. We have planning and regs and their activity level does rise and fall over the course of the year. We have our flood control and flood forecasting programs. They, by and large, they don't change. I haven't seen any change in staff count there since I've been here 8 years. So the scope of those projects, by and large, except for 2024, with the new demands, is not terribly variable. We can special levy still if we had to. So there's not as much requirement for reserve. There, I mean, we should still have some cushion if 1 year we put a 15% levy increase in our budget and half of our member municipalities just said, you can levy me, but I'm not paying. I don't know. We could still operate for a few months, but then we would have to do something, right?
Or the one municipality that pays the most says,
Because you can't really tell what could happen. That's what the nature of a reserve is all about, right? So I just don't see the variability there or the as great a restriction in revenues, potential revenue source. I see fairly consistent expenses in category 1. It should be stable. Category 1 programs. So not as large a reserve, I don't think. That's category 3.
It's the 50% recommendation, but it's still, based on total operating costs, which for category 1 is,
For a business.
yeah, it's like $12 million, yeah.
We're a 70-year organization, we're a public agency. We're not gonna close our doors that fast. I just don't see it. The need is there. The risks aren't as great. So
And the money ultimately would come from levy.
ultimately,
Yeah.
most of it.
Committee,
oh, so category 1 is less of a problem than category 3. In that it's smaller reserve and we have more options to raise the money. So
Well, we have levy is the way.
Yeah.
If we had a serious problem. The building had a major fire. we need to continue operating. We need to fix the building. So it takes $3 million 1 year to fix the building. I don't know, I'm picking a number out of the air, but that would be the kind of contingency you would need to cover in category 1, I should think.
What about any legal matters?
Hmm?
What about any legal matters?
Claim. Planning claim.
Lawsuits that we.
A lawsuit.
Works on every once in a while. Drag on for years.
Yeah. But in any 1 year, how much would you need? Because you would have time to respond in your next year's budget.
But how much are we protected by insurance on fire or illegal?
Yeah, we're generally for those type of ones. I was thinking if it was more related to a legal proceeding for a violation.
Where we have
Drags
legal
on.
fees as opposed to.
Exactly.
Yeah, you might have an unexpected,
That goes through our insurance.
you might have $150,000 in legal fees 1 year that you didn't count on. Or even 2 instances of that, because you might not just need a contingency once in the course of a year. We've had 2 dam, not dam failures, but we've had 2 dam incidents just this year that were not predicted. So,
But something like that would be out of the capital asset or the water and erosion control structure
that
reserve.
one would be, yes.
Yeah, okay,
dam related.
right. Okay. How much was that? There was one sub pump issue and then there was,
Yeah, some pump failure. I don't have the total cost yet.
Oh, okay.
I think we're close to 50,000 now so far.
so, again, going back to the category 1 operating reserve, conceptually, are we okay with 2 to 3 months and
Yeah, I think
start there and?
Christine's got these numbers, talking to staff who know more about the rest than we do, so I'm at this point.
It's about risk and need. Right? If we're doing a better job planning our annual or, 2 or 3 year out budgets, then we can begin to adopt that thinking. And as we do asset management planning as well, we're going to think about the risks to the program or the structure or the asset or whatever. And maybe these numbers will have to change in time. Quite conceivably.
So I'm just wondering, I don't know, does the committee want to go through the other 3? Or are we kind of comfortable? This is a starting point. The numbers may change over time, but does it kind of make sense? So that Christine can go away and finalize the policy and bring it back. I think ultimately we'd ask this to come directly to the board as opposed to one more kick through here. Yeah. The only one I did want to talk about was the long-term investment reserve, but I want to put that off until we finish the operating water erosion control and capital asset renewal. But rather than dealing with them one by one, because I think we've had a good discussion about, do these numbers make any sense? We're relying on Christine for her expertise, and we're also saying, we're going to look at it another year anyway. The tricky part is going to be funding them, not determining the policy.
That is going to be the tricky part.
Guys, are we okay then?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, that's it,
Okay.
okay.
based on Christine's recommendations, which is based on staff recommendations.
Mhm.
I think we don't have the expertise to say.
Yeah.
That's $1 million off.
Right.
The managers, the program managers, and Chris for the structures, and Teresa for 40 years experience doing programming here.
Mhm.
She has a very strong sense of how variable those programs are, or how much at risk they are, how appealing they are to the funders and the grant applications that she writes. So you know, her confidence level in the category 3 programs is good to have. But then you speak with our HR manager and they say, well, what happens if category 3 funding dries up? The province just says, that's it, I'm out of this environmental business. And we've got 10, 20-year service staff that no longer have work. What is that going to cost the organization? The number gets really big.
Yeah.
Really big. So
In a hurry.
The general business concepts that I've heard, depending which business it is, they always say we have to have some reserve on hand. Well, how much is it? I've heard anywhere from 3 months to a year, depending which business you're talking about. So the numbers like 4 to 6, 2 to 3 months, that sounds reasonable to me. Like, oh, the operating at 2 to 3 months seems kind of small, but our ability to fund them would prohibit us from trying to go higher than the 2 to 3 months you suggested. So, and yeah, you've already identified that as not as high a risk as the category 3 operating. So no, I'm good with these targets in terms of the time, like the 2 to 3 months, what the dollar numbers amount.
they change.
We can just review that from 1 year to the next.
Yeah, the last one that I wanted to just raise was the long-term investment reserve. And Christine's number of 40% of the portfolio value is based on really a catastrophic year in the stock and bond market, essentially. That's pretty, I think it's pretty pessimistic.
I didn't like it in 2008.
Well,
My
yeah,
little fund dropped 30%.
yeah.
I really didn't like that.
Yeah, well, nobody did. But it,
40 is a little extreme.
I kind of thought it's a number. You know, we could start with that number and move it around, obviously, and the long-term reserve is money we're not touching anyway. So, you know, it's kind of, it's on paper, it's not really money set aside because it's money inside the long-term investment anyway, right?
So it makes it easy to keep it stashed in its own reserve.
Well, yeah,
Rather than say, oh, the portfolio gained $300,000 this year. Let's bring it into the operating activities, lower the levy. That's a choice.
But our investment philosophy now is to let the investments grow, right? It's not the full, it's a long term. So it's there.
right, but you're suggesting the reserve for that, though, would have a different purpose.
Well, the reserve would be there in case the market down tanked heavily in 1 year, and we experienced a $300,000 loss. The way we did in the first year we had the portfolio.
Yeah.
The operations had to absorb that loss that year. It hurt. We had a deficit. I'm just saying, if the long-term portfolio gains, kind of ignore it, put it over there in its own reserve. So that in years when it does tank, we're not impacting category 1 programs, so category 2 programs or 3, whatever, because there's the cushion is right over there already. So that reserve should be enough to absorb a critical downturn in markets in any given year.
You won't get to 40% right
But let's
away.
not- No,
Unless the market went up 40% and
yeah,
then,
and then fell again.
yeah. And we're on our books, on the financial statement, it's at cost anyway.
Yep.
Right? So the real dollars could be set aside. And this is a reserve we could start to build right away. Technically.
We did last year.
Oh, that's why there's money in it. Yeah.
I was headed on this direction last year.
A little freelancing.
No, it's not up to me, but
side sometime.
somehow,
Yeah.
so.
So again, committee, do we stick with, 40% as a number and it's just to build it over time.
So this money's, this is our profit
The gain.
of the gain. Okay, so instead of
Each year.
kicking it back into the investment, we're putting it in.
No, it stays in the investment, but the value of the gain, because we do every year buy and sell within the portfolio.
Right.
And if we sell at a higher value than the cost was,
Yeah.
we really fully gain.
Yeah,
That gain gets dropped into the reserve.
okay. But it's still within the investment.
You know, all the money stays there. nothing
Still there.
comes out.
It's not like we pull it out and put it in a
Not a bit.
bank
Never.
account or
We've
underneath,
never withdrawn from that.
underneath the bed or
It's
something.
just an accounting transaction.
And in 2023, wasn't there a change that we actually had to start showing those gains in a separate line item?
No, it's the other way around.
Oh, the other way around.
Yeah.
I'm like, there was something about the gains.
Yeah, it's okay. So we just tuck it away and if we get to a point in time where the portfolio value is worth more than 40% of, if the reserve is worth more than 40% of the portfolio value, well, then we don't need a bigger contingency for the portfolio. At that point, we can start putting the gains into our operations, I should think. How long that'll take it. Depends on how the markets do.
Well, and that then raises the question, is 40% too high?
It might be.
Should we drop it to 20 in order to have an earlier opportunity to draw from that reserve into operations? So even a 7% increase annually, that would only take 3 years as opposed to 5.5, 6. So that's where I was kind of coming from and thinking 40% is too high. Not plus I think 40% loss is 2 standard deviations outside the norm. But for being able to mitigate some of the category 1 costs,
Sooner is better.
sooner is better. So 20 may be the outside number for this as opposed to even 10. 10 is kind of dicey, but it's up to the committee. Thoughts?
I'm more comfortable with 20 because the only time it's been beyond that, I would guess, would be a few years ago with COVID. And then you gotta go back to 2008. I know my portfolio, COVID, when 2008, I was still paying a mortgage, so I didn't have to worry about my investments. But I think, so in the last quarter century, there's been 2 times that it's been more than 20%. So I think, especially considering the pinch we're in on operating, that it may make more sense at this point to say 20%. And rather than tying it up.
Yeah, Harsh?
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. I'm okay with 20%. That sounds like a good number.
I might even lean towards 15, but but we'll stay with 20% for now. But I agree, yeah, we'll be looking at that financial help sooner rather than later. You said the asset management plan, Christine, would be 5 years out.
Oh, a full comprehensive asset management plan is gonna take that long.
So that 20% 5-year
Will be
time window seems more compatible than 5 years and the 40%.
The investment policy describes the risk tolerance as distinctly uncomfortable with a loss of 15. So as a guideline, in that ballpark. Distinctly uncomfortable.
Distinctly is an interesting.
20% is good.
Hey, make that edit.
So on the policy, are you comfortable with what we've done with the reserves to go away with a final policy? And there anything else in the document that we missed? I know it says budgetary and reserve policy, but it's primarily reserve policy.
No, we need to talk about the budgetary part,
Okay,
if you don't mind,
no, of course.
because it's, I mean, you're not gonna get any reserves unless you know how you're gonna budget.
Okay, so that's page 1 through 3, anyway, right?
From the top of page 2.
Yeah, top of page 2. Yep. Thoughts? And it's a biggie because, you know, right at the first line, category 1 must be fully funded. And you've slipped that into the 2025 budget already.
And that was the 15% increase in levy
Yep,
to achieve that,
yep.
which got, in my mind, incredible unanimity for that size of an increase.
Well, we got
Budget discussion.
yeah, we got 2 board members to say yes, that they understood it. Or seemed to be comfortable with it.
Yeah,
To share with the committee, I heard from one other representative from Oxford who was fine with it primarily because Oxford is the county of Oxford deals with our budget as opposed to the municipalities such as Zora, Ingersoll, and Woodstock. So it wasn't as big an issue as it would be for other municipalities in Perth, particularly. I did hear from Tom, who was uncomfortable. I explained it. I sent you what I sent him. He's still not thrilled with the idea of a 15% jump. Could we do something over a 2-year period? I worry about that kind of thing because we've already told London that after this year, it's going to be 3%. So if we went from 15% to 7%, for argument's sake, A, we'd be doing it by a deficit budget. B, London would thank us today, but forget us tomorrow, I'm afraid. They would go back and say, whoa, wait a minute, you said 3%. Thank you for what you did last year, but no, we're not going up this year. That's personally my worry. I mean, I'm not on council, so I don't know what they'll do. But I get nervous when you start making changes up from what you had promised in a multi-year budget. So, you know, we can always violate this policy by changing the 2025 budget, but conceptually, this would get us back on a decent track if we adopt this policy towards category 1. And, you know, essentially, this has to go to the board anyway. But it would be something that I'd be highlighting in the presentation of this when it goes to the board next month. So committee, how do you feel about it? I know there were a lot of concerns last year about the deficit budget.
I just had a quick question, like what's the dollar amount for like the 1% of the levy? Like what does it equate to? Do we know?
Percent?
Yeah, a 1% increase in levy is how many dollars? Is that what you're asking?
Yes,
Harsh?
yes.
Yeah.
Uh, 85,000.
Okay. It just kind of gives me a little bit easier, okay, if we save 85,000 somewhere, that's 1%.
The thing about category one being fully funded in the notes says regardless of the percentage of costs. So we've been talking in the 2025 budget of moving the levy up to 66% of costs. Well, if the provincial and federal grants that are currently received or expected to be received in category one don't happen, the percentage of costs would rise. Because we would just have to replace that with levy. So levy is the last funder for category one, but it's the most critical and it's the one that we have power to fluctuate with, right? So we're not targeting 66% of costs. We're targeting full funding for whatever our costs are,
That 66 is fluctuating depending
depending on the other
what
funders.
happens between now and when we set the levy.
Right, and what kind of planning fees,
Yeah.
Yeah.
get approved.
For example, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but there was over $1 million, almost $1.5 million from category three allocated to category one.
Yeah, there's the draft 2025 budget is 1.7 million.
Yeah. Now, that is inclusive of what's been announced,
Yes.
because you expected it.
Yeah.
And you expected the full amount.
Not quite.
Okay,
In the back pocket, but
yeah,
yeah,
So-
it's $1.9 million.
yeah, so you can nudge that a little bit the next round, right? But not 85,000. Or maybe 80,
Maybe,
okay.
possibly.
Yeah, so but that, your point being is that 1.7 million or whatever the number is, just means instead of a big number from levy, 66% of the total comes from levy. Whereas in past years, it was 60, but or less, yeah, because we were very proud of being one of the lowest, having the lowest levy percentage of many conservation authorities because we were so good at getting other money. Now it's kind of biting us in the butt of the blue. Anyway, sorry. So, sorry, Harj, I interrupted.
No, that's perfect. That was great dialogue. That's great.
Back to your point, Sandy, about if instead of going 15, you cut it in half, 2 or something like that. And the problems that may cause with the city of London, since we've already committed in their multi-budgeting. I think you have to look at the politics of it and then do we split this up to make us a smaller contributor happy? Dollar wise, with potential of costing of us a lot of dollars if the city of London in 2026 says no, 3% is all you get instead of 7%. Because those dollars are a huge difference because city of London contributes what 60% or something to our levy. So to save, you know, 10, 15, $20,000 to a smaller municipality, you could end up losing hundreds of or millions the way around. And much as I work in a small municipality and I think we all should be treated equally, reality is you can't, based on where we're at. And we've already made a commitment. I think it also kind of read between the lines was, yeah, that everybody at the last meeting says, well, yeah, we support it, but that's a lot different than going to their councils and saying, okay, it's going up 15%.
Yeah,
Some of these
exactly.
councils 15%, and it's an extra $5,000, they get all bent out of shape over it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, Harts, did you have a chance to talk to any of your colleagues on Stratford Council about this when it came through in September?
I didn't get an opportunity. I was away. However, I believe, the mayor did have a conversation with Brian regarding that.
Okay, all right.
So I guess, so what's the option? Just looking at the other side of it, if you don't fully fund category 1 program budgets, then either you get the money from levy, you either get the money from somewhere else, or you don't do the work, right? Or you don't.
And they're
do the
mandatory
activity.
programs.
And they're mandatory, so it's fruitless to go around this circle of denial.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
it's mandatory to do the tasks.
Yeah.
And even if you wanted to, had the ability to not do the tasks, there's the delay cost of putting it off to a later date. That would exceed, like, people think it's expensive now, but okay, sit on it for a year or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And see how much more it's gonna cost you then to do that same activity. That you could have been there, done it already and paid for it a lot cheaper and moved on. So just stop going around in circles and just admit it. Yes, it's mandatory. It has to be paid for. It's cheaper to pay for it now than to delay it later. Just if you get past that, then you have a better chance of dealing with future issues as they come along.
If I can chime on that, I agree with that too, because I think we're in the situation because of previous years. And it's kind of brought us, to here. If we just keep kicking it down to the next year, eventually somebody's gonna have to deal with it. And the first thing is just deal with it now, and then we kind of move forward with a fresh start.
And that's what, when I get questions hard at my council from my colleagues.
Yeah.
I just tell them flat out, it was always there.
Yeah.
It was always ours to deal with in the first place.
Yeah.
It was just never put into the same level of priority. As the rest of our municipal assets within our own municipality, like everyone, the perception is that within your own municipality, whatever they see, councillors see in their municipality, well, that's ours. And we own that. But this Upper Conservation Authority stuff, whether it's Upper Thames or Oswald, Bayfield, Maitland, or whatever, or Grand River, whichever CAs are in your municipality, well, that's their stuff. Let them look after it. But really, the member municipalities own it too, and we seem to be slow catching on to the idea that it's a shared ownership, not separate. So the sooner we admit that we need to do it, the faster we admit the ownership, and then the quicker we plan more proactively to deal with it in the future. So
We face the same in Stratford, just within our own municipality, levy and taxes. The number was really high, but it was set because, in previous years, and the percentage was very little because council didn't approve it. But now, if we don't fix it, then our kids are gonna be fixing it. We're not setting them up in a good, roads need to be redone, everything needs to be redone. So, we just took that, okay, it is what it is, we have to address this, let's address it now. And then, coming years, we can kind of do better than this.
And I think one of the things that's gonna help when we bring this forward, in October is also gonna have the next round of the budget as well. And Christine, are you gonna be able to put in there, at least at a high level, a draft 2026 budget?
Yes.
That's gonna be 3%.
I want to see the expense side of that before I say, yeah, absolutely, yes, but that's the goal.
Yes, yeah, because we kind of have marching orders from London. Kind of. Yeah.
Kind of.
We've had that discussion, but yeah, I think it'll help the medicine go down a little better if we are actually telling the member municipalities, this is it. We ain't going down double digits anymore. This will get our house in order please.
Provided nothing
Well-
else rocks the boat in the meantime.
Well, that's it, exactly.
Yeah, but that's the proviso. And
Well-
that should be the common understanding, but
Yeah.
I agree, Sandy, like, whether it's the marching orders from London, how would the marching orders be any different from the rest of our members?
Well, exactly.
In terms of
Yeah.
getting things under control.
Well, I think one of the comments though, I mean, to be frank, with Tom's email was, gee, I thought last year was the year we were gonna stop doing this. And everything was gonna be better this year. Maybe that's just didn't remember exactly the discussions for which time,
The
but
warning was out last year that it was not 1 year, but 2 years.
Yeah, and with last year was because we had all these deadlines where we needed extra staff and extra work needed to be done. And we used reserves so that last year's increase was. For years, our increase was like that, last year was like that, we hadn't used reserves, it would have been like that.
more deficit.
And now we have to do that because we don't have any reserves to bring it back down.
And we're saying we don't want to have a deficit in category 1.
No.
So one of the risks, I'm gonna lay it out there. One of the risks behind this statement is that we should be holding ourselves to it periodically when we make a budget. And if we say we're going to fully fund category 1 programs, if, for instance, the province drops a new category 1 program on us, we're gonna have to fully fund that too. Source water being.
Source water being one of them, yeah.
Right. But I think having made this statement, we should be held to it. Because the other reason is the risk associated with not fully resourcing mandatory programs. Because we have a history of saying, we're gonna fully fund it, we're gonna do this, and we don't.
Yeah.
Then we're walking the tightrope of claims that you knew about the issue and you didn't deal with it. Right? So when you go to make the statement, it's perhaps why we haven't made this statement in the past. Because we wanted the flexibility. But we have no more reserves. We have not built them up over 70 years sufficiently.
And if the province did come to us with another program that costs us more money, then we have a legitimate argument to go back and say, well, we said it was going to be 3%, but
Yeah.
this is why it has to be higher. And if you don't like it.
Well, that's kind of why we have the option raised at the last meeting about, do we have a separate source water
Mhm.
levy showing up on what we build the municipalities, just to show them? It's a provincial category 1 and the province isn't funding it anymore
Mhm.
in the way it used to, let's put it that way. Now, I don't know if it's too trivial at this stage, but maybe it's for maybe for
I'd have to look at
2026.
close, yeah.
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 I mean, I don't want to create more work for something that's,
No, we set ourselves up for it,
yeah, okay,
knowing
all
that
right.
this might
Yeah,
happen.
I mean, I saw the column.
Yeah.
But maybe it shows up in 2026 as opposed to 20.
We'll see.
So I'm just wondering, so for page 2, which deals with the operating budget as a policy, knowing that board can say notwithstanding a policy, are we good with what's on there to go to Christine to put it in a report for October that the board adopted?
You're talking,
The,
operating inclusions and
well, yeah, I'm talking about I'm talking about the
the policy statement,
policy statement, operating budget, including the operating budget conclusions.
including that. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable. That's-
Dean Harsh?
I'm fine with that, yeah.
Okay. Get to capital in a minute.
No, well, like I said earlier, we we can't keep running this circle of denial. The
No.
sooner we admit it and get on with it, then the quicker we can realize some relief later on, so. I guess if, again, I go back, if there's complaints, then just fiduciary responsibilities could be emboldened in the print in the font, but
Yeah.
yeah, like
Okay.
what Christine said, if you don't do it, then you run the risk of having that boomerang back on you later on if there's something happening.
Let's go on to page 3, which is the capital budget. And sorry for dragging this out, but this is really important stuff and we need to get it done for the October board meeting. So I hope your time is good still, folks, to work on this a little longer. Okay. Christine, do you want to talk to this one? Because I think it's, obviously it's wordier.
Yeah.
And it's probably a little more detail and maybe, you know, understanding stuff like, well, completed in the year or the following year. So do you want to speak to this a little bit?
So the water erosion control, generally WECI funded projects don't officially end until March. So it has happened that we don't think about doing a capital project at a structure until the WECI application is already due. We haven't levied for it in that year. So we have to levy the following year if it's WECI approved and we proceed with the project. So that's why those ones say funded in the year that you're going to do the project or at least the following year. The other part to that is that these are expensive projects and we have been known in the past to offer a payment plan to a member municipality for a large project. So it's 250,000. There's no way our budget can absorb 250,000 for one dam project in a year. Okay, pay it over 2 years or maybe 3.
Mhm.
So we levy in that fashion for those. We have very complex tracking of costs and amortization and levy for WECI funded projects because of the reporting requirements to WECI, but so we can handle that. The other ones, the UTRCA wide capital projects should be funded in the year, right? Or the following year as well. Capital maintenance levy made in sufficient amount each year for the planned projects. Now that's different than our 2025 draft budget. We did not put in here capital maintenance levy for vehicles and equipments and IT servers and all that jazz to the amount that we think we're going to spend. So that statement we've already negated for 2025 as it stands. There may be some room to massage the 2025 budget still to get it down a little bit. Because I don't think there's room to increase the capital maintenance levy. But the idea behind that is that our capital maintenance levy demands are only going to rise, especially with asset management planning. So funding half is not sustainable either. It's also how we got into the having no reserve situation. So I think it has to be fully funded as well. Campground operations will have deficits for capital spending because they're going to be using their reserves and their healthy reserves, and they generate a profit every year, so or surplus every year. So we don't have to say that those need to be funded into your spending. Fortunately, we're going to be deferring a lot of 2024 capital projects at the campgrounds as it stands into 2025. So.
Is that for financial reasons or just?
No, we just can't get the work done. We're waiting to do get some planning reports to guide the spending.
Okay.
Which is a really good reason to delay spending.
Yeah.
Find out you put it in the wrong place, right? So So the capital, the funding of capital projects, by and large, they should be fully funded when you're gonna do them, or when you're gonna finish them in a very short period of time. That way, we're not amortizing that cost over a really long time. We did that with the hydro plant. We are still paying today in our budget for capital spending on the hydro plant that was done 13 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
The hydro plant hasn't been operating in 5 years. And so that puts a burden on our operating budget.
Yeah.
It's not category 1, it's category 3, but it still puts a burden on our budget. Right? We don't have to be in the hydro generation business. It's
True,
not mandatory.
but it replaces some Capital One costs when it's running. Because it used to anyway. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, it's.
I'm off on a
complicated,
tangent.
yes. It is complicated, that one, but
Because it offsets
Let-
expenditures.
Yeah, let's not go there.
yeah, so we don't want to be burdening future operating budgets and future levy demands
Yeah.
for spending we're doing today. I know that's unlike what municipalities do, because municipalities use their reserves all the time. They build them and they use them. Ours are not dealt with that way. These are definitely contingency reserves that we're having here. So we need the funding when you're spending.
Committee,
Some percentage complaints here, that makes sense.
Harsh?
No, I'm good with this. I was just reviewing it once again.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that, certainly if you are looking at it between now and, a week or two before the October meeting, please feel free to go directly to Christine, or I don't know, Tracy, you want to be CC'd?
Yeah, copy
Yeah.
of it.
If you've got suggestions for things that should be changed, definitely wording changes in particular, but yeah. I mean, if there's anything that this big comes up, we'll talk about it at the board. So, on this item, the budget and reserves policy, there was it's a recommendation that it be for discussion, but I'm wondering, can we formalize something and say that the Finance and Audit Committee has reviewed the policy document, made suggestions, and has asked staff to present a final draft at the board meeting to be held in October. Moved by Paul,
Yeah, that's reasonable.
seconded. Harsh, seconded by Harsh. Further discussion on the motion. Michelle, you look, oh. Okay. Just checking,
Got it? Can I read it out just to
please.
be? Okay. That the Finance and Audit Committee has reviewed the policy document, made suggestions, and asked staff to present a final draft at the board meeting to be held in October.
So we're good?
Yep.
So it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Carried, thank you. 2025 budget discussion. I mean, we've gone back and forth with it. But I wanted, Emily, could you put up the slide? Sorry?
The one you sent me?
Yes, please. Yeah, in responding to Tom. Yeah, thank you. It dawned on me that when I looked at 2024 and 2025, particularly for category 1, which is, main levy stuff, operating levy in particular, this jumped out at me as being a good summary, probably even a good summary for the municipalities. And I've highlighted 3 things on each of the slides. So this is 2025. So the operating costs for category 1 are 12,800,000 round numbers. Emily, if you flip to the other page, which will show 2024, our operating costs are only up by about $350,000 in category 1. My suspicion would be that that's the salary, the compensation for staff. But where the big number difference is in the municipal levy between the two. Because in category 1 last year, we budgeted a $1.2 million deficit. And we didn't like that. Christine's moved forward with fully funding category 1. Flip back to 2025, please, Emily. So we have essentially a balanced budget for category 1. The implication of that is the municipal levy went from 7 million and change to 8.5 million. Hence the 15% change.
1.2 deficit plus the added
Yeah.
operating
That's a
costs.
3, yeah,
Yeah,
Surprise, surprise.
simple math.
yeah, I mean, I thought this was the simplest, the most straightforward way of presenting it to our member municipalities and the councils. Because here's the change. And then, you know, we've got the information that staff presented last time. If you don't like the number, maybe there's another few thousands coming from category 3. And you can play with the deficit. If we want to run a deficit, we can reduce it a little bit. The consequences are laid out very clearly by staff. It's still double digit before, I mean, if to get it below double digits, it's not going to be good for the organization.
You'll still have a $700,000 deficit.
So, you know, it's, I don't know where else we monkey with the budget to find more in the reduce the expenses in category 1. I assume staff have already done that work for us.
And the difference in expenses between 24 and 25 is the staff that were hired in 2024 were only here part of the year. In 2025, they can be in 12 months.
So you did us a favor by budgeting for part year instead of full year.
Well, yeah, it was more accurate. We knew we were going to be hiring everybody for the whole year. But this is exactly the picture that we gave to London initially.
Yeah.
Huge increase in levy to eliminate a deficit. And that's when the mayor said, nah, I'm capping it at 15% because we had initially put in something like 28 or something.
Yeah, it was close to 30.
Very close to
Yeah.
30 anyway. But this was the intention.
Yeah, this is, in London terms, they call it flow-through costs from the staffing piece. So, you know, short of, how are we as the Finance and Audit Committee saying to our board, or the rest of the board, we've looked at the budget that was presented in September. We've had discussion, and you know, other than some tweaks that Christine's going to come back with, overall, we're recommending or saying to the board, we don't want a deficit budget.
A deficit budget's not really an option because we already broke the piggy bank open and emptied it. We've done that multiple times.
Well, we could drain the 300,000 out of the operating reserve.
And we don't know what kind of surplus we might have this year,
Yeah.
right? Because that's not in any of that.
Surplus in
We might
category,
go to surplus.
in category one.
We might.
Yeah, you presented that in September, that we
Yeah.
might. You weren't 100% as confident as,
No, and I ran the numbers this morning and it's fallen again, so as it would, right, as time goes by. But
We do a lot of spending in the fall.
we do a lot of spending in the fall, that's why I'm not gonna jump to any conclusion.
yeah.
And revenue,
And you can see the impact the fees has, the fee freeze has on
Yeah.
here. If that persists,
Yeah, well, that was $350,000.
there you go.
which would have covered our increased
In expenses,
expenses, yeah.
which would have lowered the levy ask. Even, right.
Comes back to the user pay philosophy, which we're not allowed to implement.
Well, not even, we weren't even at user pay.
Oh, partial user pay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
30%. We were at 30%.
yeah,
User pay.
Yeah.
We're trying to get to 50.
yeah,
Policy says 50.
yeah.
We can't get to 50 with the fee freeze.
Yeah. We may want to look at that policy again, but, you know. You know, short of directing staff to find another hunk of money, which is still gonna be a double-digit increase. I'm kind of stuck on making anything other than to say we've reviewed it. You know, we asked staff to include a draft 2026, not full budget, but a number. And I think we also need to, I had inadvertently referred to this committee that we include a 3% increase for Schedule B of the municipal cost apportionment agreements, which is category 3. I was trying only to refer the budget part, but got carried away and referred that part back too. I'll get to actually the wording of the motions in a minute. So, we okay, folks?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
So what's,
Yep.
what's the response then to a suggestion from the board or the member municipalities saying, well, rather than find additional revenue, why aren't you cutting your costs by laying off staff or reorganizing your staffing and so forth? That's been mentioned before, so I
Yeah.
would be shocked if it didn't get mentioned again, but I'm looking to Christine and Tracy, but my answer would be, well, which services in your municipality do you want cut? Which planning applications don't you want processed this year? That would be my answer, but
Well, exactly. Go back to, these are mandatory programs and services. And now through the changes that have been made, both to the Planning Act, but also to the Conservation Authorities Act and our Section 28 regulation, there's timelines associated with being able to process those applications. So we need that staffing capacity in order to meet those legislative requirements. And then our other activities, such as our dam operations, flood forecasting and warning, we need to have staffing available to be able to provide that program. There's, can't just choose not to run those programs on weekends. We've got to be providing that level of service. And there's no opportunities to really cut staffing costs, which is over 80% of our costs is the people. And we need those positions in order to provide those mandatory programs.
And you, again, just to build on what you said, Nate, so you've looked at that. You've contemplated reducing staff and come to the conclusion that it would inhibit us from delivering mandatory program.
And aren't there financial penalties if we don't meet the deadlines on some of those applications?
For planning, that got retracted
Yeah.
at one time.
I remember that was in
it.
there somewhere, that if it didn't got met by the deadline, then they would cut the fee by 50% or something like that.
Exactly.
But that got pulled out.
That ended up getting retracted.
That's
with
good.
the
That's
other
good.
Changes.
Because if it was still in there, that would be another argument.
But instead, you'd be dealing with appeals. And, you know, that's additional costs and time to deal with the appeal mechanisms, either to, under Planning Act applications, going to the Interior Land Tribunals, or not meeting our own timelines and dealing with administrative reviews and appeals as well.
And further to Paul's question, even though the provincial penalties for lateness are gone, the incentives to the municipalities to build X number by Y date, those incentives are still there, so anything that delays that process is counterproductive to that scheme of things, so they would be wise to
Use that as a point.
to work with us, help us so that we can help them.
Now, do all municipalities have a target, including yours?
Well, I'd have to research that a little bit more closely, but I'm just thinking of the larger contributors to our watershed. They've already communicated that to us previously, so.
Ours, did Stratford get a target from the province as well?
Like I said, I was away for the last couple of weeks, not that I heard of.
Okay.
I'm sure if the others have, I'm sure we've got that one too.
But it was anywhere that strong mayor powers were given,
I think that's right. It was
Then
only larger
target-
municipalities.
or then tied with that.
And I think there had to be some kind of an application that it was pretty complicated, so
Yeah.
it wasn't a blanket.
No, I didn't think so.
Then we might not have, then we might have been.
Yeah.
I think Woodstock. though, was-
Woodstock,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woodstock was in on that.
All right.
But even getting away from strong mayor powers,
Yeah,
just local municipalities that have a need to get their
sure,
projects approved.
yeah.
To satisfy their local situations, then, yeah, this is the way forward.
One of the other things some of our board members may ask about is, well, why aren't we drawing from the long-term investment reserve? I mean, it's not a lot of money. It's, gonna reduce it by 1% and a bit. But why wouldn't we do that now?
We wanted that pool in perpetuity
Right.
and we wanted it to grow, to be worth something.
Yeah, but I think I'm stuck on the point that if we reduce it, we've already told London, we're gonna meet their target, they cut it to 15%. They're okay with that at this point in time. If we do them a favor, I don't think they're gonna do us a favor for their 2026 budget review. I mean, there's no guarantee.
Especially when 2026 is an election year.
Yeah, so. Yeah, we could probably play around with it a little bit. But I don't think there's a long-term. I don't even think there's a short-term benefit to doing it.
Even the 3% is gonna be tough. Because although we might put our grid up 2.5, pick a number, we've still got property taxes up 6%, liability insurance up 9%, directors and officers insurance up 5%. That's all category 1. So even when we say 3% levy increase, we've got costs going up higher than 3%.
Is there, I mean, I'm asking, the committee this question more than anything else is. I've always found it really interesting that part of what we pay is property taxes.
Yeah.
To our member municipalities, some more than others. Perth, I think, we pay more because of Wildwood. Or the dam, whatever. How much, having that available for the budget meeting, I think is just. It may be interesting information, may not be helpful, but.
$330,000.
Right. Okay. So what are you budgeting for 2025?
6% higher.
Okay. Please include that in your report.
Yeah, just to show how much money is just being traded back.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is,
One pocket to the other.
But we're budgeting an increase
Yeah.
in what we're paying to the municipalities.
Yeah.
And it's, you know,
Forcing their property tax.
well, forcing them up, but it's a line in our operating budget that's category one. Yeah. So you cut both ways, yeah. So we're good? Okay.
Yep.
So I'll try, this is the motion that the committee met to review the 2025 budget and is, I don't know if we want to say recommending, but has reviewed the 2025 budget and has asked staff to incorporate changes based on the recent announcement from the federal government contract and any review that, but that it is supportive of the balanced budget, sorry, the non-deficit budget for category one. That it is putting back that recommendation, and it's in last in the September budget about the 3%.
The 3% increase to Schedule B of municipal cost apportionment agreement.
Right. And thirdly, that the committee asked staff to include in the October report a high-level draft of the 2026 budget, or a high level estimate of the 2026 levy increase for category one. Yeah. So when Michelle's had a chance to type that out and read it back, we'll ask for motion. Oh, I really think it would be really helpful to show the 2024-2025 comparison side by side in that report.
Maybe in the budget presentation.
Yeah. I mean, I think people want to see the big sheet 2024-25 as well, but to me, this at a glance is easiest. I don't know how everybody else feels about it. But
I think that'd be a great, then the real realization is that, you know, the number really hasn't changed that much.
yeah,
Yeah, sometimes the percentage looks big, but when you look at dollar values,
Yeah.
and it's not really.
and we're, well, and
And
we're,
we're funding a deficit for 20, or you're eliminating a deficit for 2025 that you had accepted in 2024.
yeah. Which you didn't like in 2024. Yeah,
Maybe, well, Michelle's typing, one question I had, Sandy, was, it goes back to the funding announcement. Any likelihood that, like, that's a 4-year agreement, any likelihood that that agreement is terminated at any time?
Federal,
So it's at their discretion to opt out at any time.
Yep.
Okay,
so
but if it's,
new government could, yeah,
but if it's self-contained, but it's all self-contained in category 3 anyway.
except for the overhead contribution.
Right. So that's our only risk then, is the overhead contribution to category 1.
That's $500,000.
Oh, in per year.
then the expenses go away.
Yeah.
And then
I think
any
that's-
severance costs would be lower.
That's what I meant. It's self-contained because it's an in and an out,
Yeah,
except just the any costs of having to do the terminations or deal with the terminations, which the reserve is.
And the positions hired for that contract are on contract, so.
Yeah.
yeah.
So our risk is just,
If it gets canceled by a new government early in the severance costs are much lower, if any. And we haven't probably ramped up all the hiring by that point either, because my discussion with Tracy, we don't hire people until we've got stuff signed on the bottom line.
It's signed now.
Well, now it's signed, but now you can start hiring.
Yeah, we posted when we knew that the signatures were coming and that the posting included until contracts were
Yeah,
signed.
and that was a discussion that Dean and I had with the mayor
Mhm.
and Councilor Cuddy, that, you know, we budget, but if we don't fill them, we're not,
We're
you know,
not
there,
counted.
we don't spend, so there's a connection between the two.
So the was it 17.4 million?
Yeah,
How close was that to what we were anticipating?
It was only short, the initial, what we thought it would be initially by the fact that it got delayed in 2024. So it was 5 million a year, but we're not going to get quite that much in the first year.
We knew we weren't gonna get the full amount, but we weren't sure when it was gonna get started in June or
So
September.
it was within a million of what you were.
Yeah. And then the other 850,000 for the innovation fund, that was for the demonstration farm and some of the education programs
So
too.
that almost evened out.
so Michelle, read it back, please.
Sorry about that. That the Finance and Audit Committee met to review the 2025 budget and has asked staff to incorporate changes from the recent federal government grant. The committee is supportive of the non-deficit budget for category one, and further that the committee recommends that the 2025 budget include a 3% increase to Schedule B of municipal cost apportionment agreements. And the committee asked staff to include in the October report a high-level estimate of the 2026 levy increase for category one.
Thank you.
That's a big recommendation.
Good.
So is there a mover for that? Moved by Dean, is there a seconder? Harsh. Okay. Further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Any opposed? I saw Harsh's. Okay, just wanted to be sure. Quickly, we'll do 4.3. This was a motion from last meeting, particularly a request from Councillor Frank. We've seen the response from Phillips Hager and North as to what is possible. Do we want to make a recommendation to Phillips Hager and North that they move their emerging markets fund to their fossil fuel emerging markets fund?
Personally, I have no problem investing in fossil fuels. I understand why the decision was to go primarily fossil fuels free. And really to move it only impacts about 5%. So if you want to do it just for strictly ideology reasons, but from an investment, I just assume leave it the way it is. That's just my first opinion.
Harsh, Dean?
I'm fine with leaving it as status quo, and I'm sure if you dig into it deeper, fossil fuels are used to provide stable baseload generation for alternate sources of energy. So they do work hand in hand as much as it seems that they don't. They do. So I would prefer to leave our policy as is.
Or leave our investments the way we are?
Yeah.
Harsh?
Yeah, I share the same opinion there. Yeah, I share that same.
Okay. Certainly know that, you know, I had shown the report to Councillor Frank and asked for her feedback, and she really wanted to know when we were going to get the 100%. You know, as we read in the report, if we continue with the alternative funds or an alternative investment side, I mean, there are no fossil fuel free, it's not an option, so we'll never get to 100%. with our existing investment, not the policy, but we've decided to stick with Phillips Hager and North. So unless we change that, we're not gonna get to 100%.
Or remove alternative investments entirely.
Or remove them entirely, and I don't think we're changing our investment policy to accommodate that. Nor, yeah, so I can. Do you need anything other than to receive the report?
Probably not, because we're not making any
We're not
changes.
making any changes. So-
Looked at it.
So can I get a motion
I'll
to
make a
move
motion
the
that we received the report.
report? This will move by Paul, seconded by Harsh. Okay, further discussion?
It comes down to what's our priority. We try to go to 100%, which is just impossible without damaging our responsibility to maximize the income on our investment, which is would have an impact on our financial positions.
Well, it might, I mean, I'm gonna say that I have retail funds with Phillips Hager and North.
Mhm.
Not to the extent where I have a conflict of interest here. But their fossil fuel emerging, global fossil fuel free fund has done really well this year. But again, returns vary year to year
Yeah.
anyway, so. It's like, and her report says, we could do better, we may not do better, depending on the stocks that are within that fund. But, I'm not arguing that we make the change. Let the counselor argue it at the board.
Yeah.
So we've got a motion to receive the report, moved and seconded, further discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, carried. I believe that brings us to the end. Thank you, gentlemen, for sticking this out. I think it was a great discussion today.
Yes, very good.
And I think it needed the time. So thank you. And can I get a motion to adjourn? Thank you, staff, too, for.
Yeah.
All right, we're done for the day. Have a good afternoon and evening, and we'll see everybody in October.